My husband is planning a cruel revenge for me and his best friend as he helped me hiding my affair. Hello, Reddit. Long-time lurker here, but this is my first time posting. I need some advice, and I know that this is a perfect place to get some, hence why I'm posting here. I made a huge mistake, and now my husband is coming back not only at me, but also at his best friend. I cheated on my husband, and his best friend helped me hide it. Now my husband says he's planning the absolute worst revenge on me and his best friend, and I need advice on how to beg him. Let me give you some backstory. My name is Ashley, and I am a 29-year-old woman. I am married to my husband Richard, who is a 30-year-old man. We have been married for 5 years. We don't have any kids yet, as we wanted them later in life. We live in the United States. My husband's best friend is named Jared. I met my husband Richard when I was 22. I'd been giving online dating a shot for a while, hoping to find someone special. But after so many disappointing matches and awkward chats, I was starting to lose hope. It's not like I didn't believe in love or finding the right person. It's just that the whole online dating scene was getting old. Swipe after swipe, I began to think maybe real connections couldn't be made through screens and messages. After weeks of this, I was seriously thinking about deleting my profile. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from my husband Richard. His message was simple and genuine, which caught my attention. So I decided to give it a shot and replied. We hit it off right away. Our chats were easy, and we found we had a lot in common. We talked about everything under the sun, and it felt like we'd known each other for ages. When we finally decided to meet in person, I was nervous but excited. As we sat in the cafe, chatting and laughing, I felt so special and free. It was like I could be myself around him, no pretense or awkwardness. By the end of the night, I knew there was something different about Richard. He made me feel comfortable and understood in a way I hadn't felt before. Before we knew it, Richard and I were officially a couple, and within a few months, we took the big leap and moved in together. It felt like a natural progression of our relationship, and living together only strengthened our bond. We spent 2 wonderful years together, navigating life's ups and downs as a team. We shared laughter, tears, and countless unforgettable moments. It was during this time that we both realized we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. So, after much thought and heartfelt conversations, we decided to take the plunge and get married. It was a joyous occasion, surrounded by our loved ones. Richard worked in sales while I worked in human resources, and as a result, Richard was always on the move for his sales job, traveling far and wide to meet clients and close deals. His days were a whirlwind of airports, hotels, and meetings, while I held down the fort in my cozy office downtown. Working in human resources meant my days were more routine, handling stuff like employee benefits and payroll. Our lives were like 2 parallel paths, running alongside each other but never quite crossing. Richard would come home with stories of his travels, and I'd listen from our living room LOL. Sometimes the distance between us felt real, but we stayed connected through late-night calls and texts. In our home, Richard brought in more money, so he covered most of the bills, around 80%. Since I was around the house more, I took charge of keeping things tidy. While Richard hustled at work, sealing deals and meeting clients, I kept the home fires burning. That meant cooking, cleaning, and making sure everything was in order. Our setup might sound old-fashioned, but it just made sense for us. We both knew our roles and appreciated what each of us brought to the table. As Richard's trips became more frequent, I started feeling really lonely. Even though I kept busy with chores and work, there was this emptiness that stuck around, like something was missing. At first, I thought it was just a phase, but the loneliness kept growing. It wasn't just about missing him physically. It was like I missed having him around, his jokes, his warmth, everything. I'd count down the days until he got back. But even when he was home, things felt off, like we were drifting apart. I knew his job was important, but the loneliness was getting to me. I tried distracting myself with friends and hobbies, but nothing seemed to help. The loneliness just kept creeping in, making it hard to shake off. I knew something had to change, whether it meant finding ways to feel closer to Richard when he was away, or focusing more on things that made me happy. During that lonely stretch, I crossed paths with Vince, a friendly coworker with a good sense of humor. We hit it off and became pals. We'd hang out at lunch, crack jokes, and sometimes grab coffee together. Vince had a way of making me laugh, and being around him made the loneliness less heavy. As we got closer, I felt comfortable opening up to him. He was a great listener, always there when I needed someone to talk to. Before I knew it, Vince became a close friend I could rely on to brighten my day and chase away the loneliness. As time passed, Vince and I started flirting more. I knew it was wrong, but with Richard away so much, I kind of stopped caring about the consequences. Whenever Richard was out of town, I'd ask Vince to come over and watch movies. Our house was pretty fancy thanks to Richard's good salary, so it was a comfy spot for hanging out. Even though I felt guilty, Vince's attention helped fill the gap left by Richard being gone all the time. One night, I asked Vince to come over for a movie, and things got even flirtier between us. Honestly, I was so into it that I didn't even think about what might happen next. We cracked open a bottle of wine and started drinking. The flirting between us was intense, and before we knew it, we crossed lines we definitely shouldn't have, and we had sex. The next morning, I woke up feeling like garbage. I'd cheated on my husband. I was freaked out by what I'd done and kicked Vince out in a panic. But if I'm being honest, there was a part of me that kinda liked it. I was so dang lonely, and Vince filled a void I didn't even realize was there. Still, I knew I messed up big time. I tried to avoid Vince at work, but that didn't last long. Temptation got the best of me, and before I knew it, we were back to square one. Vince didn't let things get weird at work. He'd still bring me coffee, lunch, and shower me with compliments. Plus, he'd text me, and I didn't even bother blocking him. Before I knew it, we were back to where we started. In just a few days, we were sneaking around, having this secret thing going on. It was oddly convenient, especially with Richard always on the road. Vince would swing by my place and we'd hang out. His situation was similar. He had a girlfriend and lived with her, so his place wasn't really an option for our rendezvous. Sometimes Vince would fib to his girlfriend saying he had to work late, just to sneak over to my place. One evening after work, he showed up at my door. We usually drove and arrived separately to avoid suspicion. After we had sex as usual, Vince decided to order some food. He had to step outside the gate to pick it up. Unfortunately, my husband's best friend Raymond decided to drop by while Vince was outside grabbing the food. Vince hadn't bothered to put on proper clothes, so he was just in a t-shirt and boxers, as he just wanted to pick up the food and come back inside. Raymond caught on right away. I was busted, plain and simple. There was no way to dance around it. He looked like he wanted to bolt, but I chased after him, begging him not to spill the beans. I poured my heart out, telling him how lonely I'd been and pleading with him to keep it under wraps. I begged Raymond not to spill the beans to Richard, and he agreed on one condition: money. Turns out he'd actually come over to borrow some cash, but now he was demanding it as hush money. He wanted $2,000 and he promised to keep quiet if I paid up. I coughed up the money because I couldn't risk him telling Richard, but I made it clear that I wouldn't be his cash cow. If he thought he could keep blackmailing me, he had another thing coming. Of course he agreed. Raymond's situation kinda made me give him the money. He wasn't pulling in much himself and played the role of stay-at-home dad while his wife Evelyn brought home the big bucks, easily making 7 figures. Without a solid education or marketable skills, Raymond didn't have many options for high-paying work anyway. So he solely had to depend on his wife, and let's just say Raymond has some bad habits, so he blew money easily. Raymond stayed true to his word and kept my secret, but he'd often hit me up for small amounts of cash, like $100 or $2. He had some serious spending habits, especially when it came to blowing money on his vices. See, Raymond had some issues. He'd burn through all the money his wife gave him for the week or month, money meant for groceries and bills, on stuff like drugs and gambling. Then he'd be too ashamed to tell his wife Evelyn and come asking me for a loan. I'd usually cough up the cash, feeling sorry for him and wanting to help out. Also, I was grateful for the fact that he kept my secret. As Vince and I carried on with our affair, I found myself feeling happier, at least in the moment. But Richard started picking up on the gaps in our relationship. Even when he was home, I'd be glued to my phone, texting Vince behind his back. As Richard noticed our marriage hitting a rough patch, he went into overdrive to bring back the spark. He went all out with romantic gestures and surprise dates, trying to make up for lost time and bridge the gap between us. From spontaneous trips to fancy dinners, Richard tried everything to reconnect with me. He poured his heart into showing me love and affection, hoping it would fix what was broken. But despite his efforts, I couldn't shake off the guilt of my affair with Vince. No matter how much Richard tried, I just couldn't get back into the groove we once had. I was cut between guilt and excitement. I found myself in a tight spot. A few days ago, instead of going straight home, I decided to hang out with Vince for a change. We grabbed dinner, chilled for a bit, then headed back to my place. But when we got there, my heart sank, seeing my husband's car in the driveway. I panicked and signaled for Vince to split, pretending he wasn't following me. He took off as I pulled into the garage. My mind was racing. Walking into the house, I was shocked to find my husband there. I asked why he was home unexpectedly, preparing for the worst. But he brushed it off, saying he missed me and changed his plans last minute. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the close call left me shaken. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, knowing how close I came to getting caught. It made me question everything and left me feeling even more stuck in this mess I'd made. At this point, I felt like a ton of bricks had hit me. I knew I had to dump Vince and focus on fixing things with my husband. Despite the thrill Vince gave me, I loved my husband too much to lose him. So, I decided to give it a few days, then call it quits with Vince and put my marriage first. But turns out my husband had checked my phone and found out my secret. That night, he acted cool, not letting on that he knew. The next day, he seemed fine, and we carried on like usual. He even said he wouldn't be traveling for a while, which made me genuinely happy and hopeful for us. As the day went on, I made plans to meet Vince for dinner after work, planning to end things with him once and for all. Work flew by, but I couldn't shake the thought of the upcoming chat with Vince. When I finally brought up going out for dinner, Vince was game, as long as I was picking up the tab. It was our usual deal, since Vince wasn't exactly rolling in dough. Despite the heaviness of what was to come, there was a weird sense of normalcy as we made plans to meet later. Deep down, I knew this dinner would mark the end of our secret fling and the start of fixing things with my husband. I braced myself for the tough talk ahead, knowing it was the first step to rebuilding what I'd messed up. We got to the restaurant and grabbed some grub. After chowing down, I knew I had to have the talk with Vince. I didn't beat around the bush. I straight up told him it was over between us. He seemed surprised and bummed out, but he took it like a champ, saying he got where I was coming from. Feeling relieved yet kinda sad, I hit the road back home. But when I pulled into the driveway, I spotted something weird on the porch. I hopped out of the car and checked it out, only to find my stuff piled up there. It was a total shock. My stomach dropped. I was totally shocked, like someone had sucker punched me out of nowhere. I hoped it was all a mistake, but as I went through my things, it was clear they were mine. I tried calling my husband, but he ignored me. Finally, a text popped up on my phone, and it was brutal. He didn't hold back, calling me every name in the book and accusing me of betraying him. He even dragged his best friend into it, saying he knew everything. In the text, he made it clear he wasn't going to let me off easy. He promised revenge that would haunt me, and to top it off, he reminded me that even the car I drove was a gift from him. Feeling completely shattered, I sat there in disbelief, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. It was like my whole world had just exploded, and I had no idea how to even begin picking up the pieces. Tears poured down my face as I realized the mess I was in. I tried calling my husband again, but he kept ignoring me. With no other choice, I had to leave. But since the car was his, I had to Uber it. Feeling lost and alone, I had nowhere to crash. My family wasn't around, and I just broke things off with James. So the only option left was crashing at Raymond's and his wife's house. Thankfully, they were cool about it and let me in. We waited till the next day when his wife was out before I spilled the beans to Raymond. Turns out he already knew. My husband had hit him up too, threatening him and telling him he would ruin him. I was terrified, like really scared for what was coming next. Now I felt totally exposed and unsure of what to do. It is like everything is falling apart, and I have no clue how to deal with it. I'm seeking guidance on how to handle and reconcile with my husband. He has a reputation for being incredibly cold and ruthless, someone you wouldn't want to cross paths with. While he seldom makes threats, when he does, he follows through with unwavering determination. If he mentions seeking revenge against me in the most extreme manner possible, I know he means it. Despite my attempts to reach out by phone, he's ignoring my calls. What course of action do you suggest I take in this situation? Update. Hey everyone, I'm sure you remember me as the woman who reached out for advice because I was terrified of the repercussions of my actions. I cheated on my husband, and his best friend helped me cover it up. I never thought I'd be back here updating you all, but I've received a lot of messages asking for updates, so here I am. It's been almost a month since I last reached out, and I want to update you all on what's been going on. Turns out my husband wasn't kidding about seeking revenge. I didn't even stay at Raymond and his wife's place for a day before I discovered that he had drained our joint account. Most of the money in there was his since he earns a lot more than me, but he took my share too. It might not have been much, but it was everything we had saved up together. So I was left with nothing. When I found out my husband had drained our joint account, I was devastated. I cried my eyes out, and even Raymond and his wife noticed. She offered to help me out financially, but that never happened after my husband got to her. It seems my husband went on a rampage to expose me. He must have snooped through my phone and found Vince's number, then tracked down Vince's girlfriend on Facebook. He spread screenshots of my chats with Vince and Raymond to everyone. My family, his family, Vince, Vince's girlfriend, Raymond, and even Raymond's wife. It literally felt like my whole world was crashing down. First off, I learned from Vince that his girlfriend had dumped him and kicked him out. He had no choice but to move back in with his parents to avoid being homeless. Then, Raymond's wife blew up when she found out he'd helped cover up my cheating. She believed cheating was wrong, and the fact that he'd assisted me made her think he was cheating too. Plus, she was furious about his gambling and drug use, which she'd suspected but never confirmed. She kicked both Raymond and me out, making it clear she was filing for divorce. We had to pool our money to afford a hotel room together, splitting the bill to keep costs down. And just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. My husband, knowing that Raymond kept drugs at home, decided to call the police on him. Raymond hadn't finished packing his things because he was still hoping his wife would take him back. So when the police showed up, they raided Raymond's and his wife's house. It was a total nightmare. Raymond was still trying to win his wife back because she was the main breadwinner, and without her, he'd be completely broke. But my husband's call to the police just made everything even more chaotic. The situation escalated quickly when the police arrived. Raymond and his wife were both arrested since they were the ones living in the house where the drugs were found. And of course, the kids were far too young to be involved in anything like this, so the blame fell squarely on Raymond or his wife. They ran a drug test, and it showed that Raymond was using drugs while his wife wasn't. It was pretty clear who was responsible. Raymond got arrested. Luckily, we'd already paid for the hotel, so at least I didn't have to stress about the bill. It might sound harsh, but I couldn't afford it on my own. Sadly, my parents refused to take me in after my husband spilled the beans about my affair. They're strict Christians and see cheating as a big no-no. They basically kicked me out and said I was never welcome back. And just when you think it can't get worse, I lost my job too. Vince faced the same fate. Everyone found out about our affair, and it was like we had targets on our backs at work. Vince had to quit to avoid being homeless, moving in with his folks. But for me, losing my job sucked even more because my husband's buddies with the boss, which made things way worse. We managed to cover about a week's stay at the hotel, but I'm already worried about what happens when the money runs out. I don't think I'll be able to afford it on my own. My only option now is to reach out to one of my siblings for a place to stay, but they all live out of state. It would mean starting over in a new place, but I'll have to wait until after the divorce. Richard's made it clear he's filing for divorce. He said he'll send someone with the papers, and I just have to let him know where I'm staying at the hotel. As for finding a job, I'm not feeling too optimistic. My resume isn't anything special, and the only reason I got my current job was because of Richard's connections with the CEO. I don't see much hope for getting anything out of the divorce. Since we don't have kids, there's no chance of child support. Plus, the house is in Richard's name, and it was a gift from his grandfather long before we even met. He had it before we got together. On top of that, we signed a prenup before we got married. And, well, there's the cheating. I can't imagine any judge would look kindly on that. So realistically, I'm not expecting to get much, if anything, out of the divorce. It's a tough pill to swallow, but I have to face reality. Honestly, the person I feel the most sorry for in all of this is Raymond. He's facing serious consequences for drug abuse, and it breaks my heart. All he did was help me cover up my affair. I knew it was wrong, but I never imagined things would spiral out of control like this. My husband's actions have essentially ruined our lives. Right now, I'm homeless and struggling to find a job. Vince had to move away just to avoid being in the same boat. And now Raymond's behind bars, with little hope of getting out anytime soon. He can't even afford bail, so he's stuck there until they decide what to do with him. And it's all because of my infidelity. The guilt is eating me up inside. Raymond's wife has the money to help him, but she's not willing to lift a finger. She won't even shell out for a lawyer, so he's stuck with whatever the state provides. And we all know how that usually goes. Pretty lousy. On top of that, she's dead set on divorcing him, and there's no way Raymond's getting custody of the kids. He'll be lucky if he doesn't end up behind bars for the drug charges, let alone getting custody in the divorce. Even if he somehow avoids serious jail time, being homeless won't work in his favor in a custody battle. As for alimony, well, that's probably off the table too. Thanks to the sad fact that H signed a prenup, Raymond's not likely to see a dime. After all of this, my disdain for prenups has reached new heights. Did I mention that Evelyn, Raymond's wife, comes from a wealthy family? That's why he had to sign one. Either way, I hope you all can take something away from my story. Don't cheat. It's just not worth it. As for me, I'm left with two choices. I can swallow my pride and beg my siblings for money to buy a ticket and stay with them. But knowing them, that's a long shot. Or I can face the grim reality of ending up in a homeless shelter by next week. So please, learn from my mistakes and don't cheat. It's a road you don't want to go down.